Michael Goldman,
Hey, hey,
welcome,
thank
sir.
you. Got my notes.
Would you like to run with some stuff before we chat?
Well, you know, I think we were talking about meetings, so I just want to kind of context or put some context around meetings. I think Jordan did a fantastic job in talking about a lot of the things that I would normally talk about.
Sure.
I think it's impossible to talk about communication without talking with about active listening and those kinds of things that are just really essential to just being a good communicator. But I could really. I think what I'm going to do is just kind of set some context for meetings and running effective meetings, especially Arthur. You had talked about yours, and so and again, I really like what Jordan had to say. Of course, I have some additional things to talk about as well. When we train on meetings, I'm a speech language pathologist by trade, by the way. Just so you know, we all have different
Backgrounds.
careers before coming into these kinds of things. I mean, literally 30 years ago when I got into this business and I told people I'm a meeting facilitator, they thought I was an event planner,
Right.
right? And it's like, and then I had to spend like, I didn't have the language on how to articulate like what a facilitator was. So I had to, it's taken years to kind of develop it. And so I kind of know how to say it now, but I didn't know it at the time. And what I know for running effective meetings, there are three things that need to be in place. It's how you show up as the leader. It's how you structure the meeting, which Jordan talked a lot about.
Right.
And it's also about how you manage the interpersonal dynamics within the room.
Mm.
Because, and each one of those are critically dependent on one another. In fact, the success of your meeting will depend upon how great each one of those are, or the failure of your meeting will be the weakest link in those three, right? So, you know, as a training company and as a company that provides facilitation support, we come in and we train people on these three elements. It's always the foundation of whatever we do. So let's talk about the first element,
Yeah.
how
Showing
how
up.
to show up.
Yeah.
So again, Jordan uses peeps for like getting that message across real quickly. We have acronyms. We always have acronyms because it helps us really understand and remember, what to do. But when I speak to leaders on how to show up for running a meeting, I talk to them about you need to really come in leaps and bounds. And leaps is an acronym. So what does the leap stand for? Well, wouldn't you know, the first one is listen actively, right? Huge, so important. And when we talk about listen actively, we talk about, Jordan talks about being present. And the question is like, well, how can I be present? Because I'm distracted. All these people are sitting at the table. I'm in a hybrid meeting. I got people on the screen. I got people in the room. How do I manage that? And, for us, what we train people on is just simple things like paraphrasing. So when someone says something, paraphrase back what you heard and check in with them. And in that way, it forces you to actively listen or ask them a question. What did you mean by that? That'll force you to actively listen. Active listening is really important, especially when you're noticing mixed messages. And that, in fact, is a very tough skill. So, in a lot of meetings that I run, I'm parachuted into, I'm facilitating a whole bunch of folks, and there's a decision on the table, and someone says, yeah, I really like that. And by the words in their body language that they're not happening. It's not happening. So as the facilitator, the first thing I have to do as a good active listener is I have to say, time out, folks, before we get there, I'm sensing there might be some concerns around this decision. And then I'll go to a person, who I kind of notice that body language, words where they weren't really jiving. I'll ask that person, any comments? And of course, that person will say, yeah, well, I'm not really happy with. So active listening is also not only being quiet and being intentional and hearing, but it's also calling out and noticing where nonverbal and verbal reactions aren't quite jiving with one another. When we talk about leaps again, when we talk about the E, we're talking about embracing neutrality. As a facilitator, particularly a leader walking into a meeting, being neutral is not easy,
Right.
right? But I have to be neutral during a debrief if I truly want to engage the people in my audience.
You don't want to affect what they have to say
And
or how they express themselves.
yeah, so, I train people on how to BTL, or bite the lip. It's like, I say great facilitators, all the little blood trickling down the side of their mouth, demonstrating neutrality because they're trying not to say anything. And when they do want to say something, I help them translate that from what I call a tell to an ask. So if you need to say, hey, I really think we should be thinking about XYZ, turn it into a question and say, hey, folks, should we be considering XYZ? What do you think? Right? Another thing that's really tough is saying, you know what, I don't like that as a leader, and the leader doesn't like that. So my sense is when I work with leaders and they're facilitating very important meetings, it's like, you know what? In the beginning of the meeting, you need to tell them all the non-negotiables. Like, hey, folks, as your leader, we're not going here, here, or here, but here's where it's totally open. And here's how much authority you have for this as well. Right? And so they don't drift. And when they drift in there, the leader can say, wait, time out. Remember, that's non-negotiable. You can go back and say that, right?
Yeah.
But you have to tell them that up front.
Yeah.
Or it screws them up. So embracing neutrality means non-positional, not being biased. And it's also meaning, like, I don't say, oh, Jim, that was a great point. And then when it's Rita's turn, I go, right? Especially during brainstorming. I got to be really careful on not really being subjective or supportive of any one idea, but rather reinforce the whole group. Like saying, hey, folks, we got 5 ideas up here on the flip chart. Great work. Let's keep on going. So I'm constantly reinforcing the teamwork element.
It's a collective.
Yeah, it's a collective. So I'm building collaboration. I'm building the team through an agenda. I'm actually building some of my best events that I facilitate. Actually underscoring it all is people walk out as a much more aligned, stronger team as a result of that, right? If you do really good facilitation. The next one is asking questions, so making sure that I'm asking good clarifying questions, good probing questions. Again, that's my role when I wear the facilitator hat. The P in leaps is paraphrasing, so repeating back in my own words what I think I'm hearing. And finally, the S is the most important thing at the end of the day, and that's summarizing. And that is, when it comes to the end of a topic, I, as a facilitator, will say, okay, so let's just sum this up before we move on. We've achieved this, this, and this. And then you're always checking in with the group. Is that right? Does that make sense? Right? So summarizing, and I don't know about you folks, but sometimes in meetings, later on in the meeting, someone says, well, what about this? And we thought we had created closure early on. That's because we really didn't summarize at the end. We didn't effectively create closure, and so someone's bringing it up yet again.
Right.
So leaps is just showing up, you know?
Yep.
So, I mean, I can go on to the next one, which is structuring, but I think, everything that Jordan said is really important, is that having the agenda, structuring the meeting. We call it POP, not PEEP, but we call it POP. And POP stands for purpose, outcomes, and process. So when I have a client and they invite me into the meeting, and I am always parachuted into the most dysfunctional teams. Anyone dysfunctional here? Okay, good. You're probably not someone I'd be working for. So I'm parachuting these. I'm sitting down with my client. I'm saying,
like, what's an example? Can you get, like, you can anonymize their identity, but like,
well, so one example is there's a project where it's going to impact a huge amount of land in, let's say, BC.
Sure.
And we got 3 teams coming together. We have the actual architects who are dealing with drilling into that mountain. We have all the people who are going to be doing the work. And then we have the people, all the suppliers that are supplying all of the trucks and all the infrastructure, right? These 3 groups have to be aligned. They have to be able to communicate to one another. So I'm parachuted in to get them aligned, to talk about what are our goals, how are we going to work together, what are our guidelines, right? So that's what I'm parachuted in. And a lot of times it's like 3 months after they came together and they're killing each other. That's when they bring me in. And, oh, Michael, come on in and help align them now, right? They finally realize they need something like that.
Yeah.
If they had done that in the beginning, they would have saved themselves so much help before getting into that kind of craziness, right? But I guess people have to learn. You have to throw them into it. You got to give them a chance to see if it works, and then you invite. And that's when hopefully the opportunity happens.
Yeah. So POP is what again?
So POP is purpose, outcomes, process. So it's like, what Jordan said is you got to know the objective. We call it outcomes, right? So for example, who has a meeting coming up here? Anyone have a meeting coming up? Yeah. So what's your meeting? Just give me a little of the background of it.
Trying to teach the entire team a new concept to help build our program strategy.
Okay. So the first thing I would say to you for outcomes in POP, because I always go to the outcomes first because it's very tangible. I'd say by the end of this meeting, what outcomes have we achieved? Why are people excited? Why are they happy now? What's been achieved? So I'm asking you, what, yeah, you go, yeah. What,
What am I hoping to?
yeah, yeah, what are you hoping to achieve?
I'm hoping that everyone has a really clear understanding of the components of this thing we're trying to teach them so that they can apply it to the projects we're working on.
Right, so they're going to have some clarity of understanding of the aspects of the project or the implementation part of the project. That's an intangible thing, so they're going to have better clarity. What would be a tangible thing? Are we coming up with actions, solutions? Are we coming up with anything tangible?
I guess the tangible will be a program roadmap.
Okay, so we'll actually have a program roadmap. So that's a real tangible thing. So let me ask you this. Those are two very important outcomes. Why? Why do you need to have a roadmap? Why do you need to have people understanding it better? What kind of higher strategic purpose?
This is the big question we're asking ourselves.
Yeah.
Because we're redesigning our entire youth program, so this is going to guide the entire design process as
Okay.
we're building our curriculum.
And is it important that the youth programs succeed?
Pardon me?
Is it important that the youth programs succeed?
Yes, it's going to
It's-
solve youth unemployment in Canada.
Nice. That
Just
sounds
a plug.
so much juicier.
Yeah.
Then we're coming together to come up with a roadmap. Okay? Now I understand what the juicy part is, and that's what I would say is your purpose, is right to ensure a great roadmap for youth in Canada, or something like that. And here's the outcomes we're achieving. One's very tangible, one's intangible. Now, so that's the purpose, now the outcomes. Now, as a facilitator, I got to sit back and think of, okay, what's the process? How many days do we have? How many hours do we have for this meeting?
The first version is an hour and a half on Tuesday.
So it's kind of a
Potentially more.
launch, the hour and a half, right? Yeah. Okay. That's okay. Listen, sometimes that's what we have. We have an hour and a half. Okay. How many people are attending?
10.
10 people. Is it important that these people walk out kind of bought into this and excited?
100%.
Absolutely. So in that hour and a half, not only are we probably going to be doing some kind of presenting, but we're going to do some kind of buy-in exercise. And the questions are going to be around, why is this important to me? Why is this important to our team? Why is this important to Canada? Right? So we're going to do some kind of buy-in exercise to kind of build up the momentum. So hopefully we have some sense of what a roadmap could look like after we get the buy-in and we can start talking about it. Because in this thing, motivation, buy-in, excitement is really important. Am I correct?
Yes.
Right on. Okay. So that's what makes a meeting pop. Yes.
How do you get buy-in and motivation?
It
That's
was
what I'm
so
really struggling with.
willingness is so important because without willingness, it's very impossible to move forward in any kind of project, right? My sense is that people who come to this thing have already bought in to some extent, or they wouldn't be there. Okay?
They kind of have to be there.
Oh, so they're voluntold.
Voluntold. I like that
Okay,
phrase.
voluntold. Okay. Well, I mean, that's important to know too. If people are arriving voluntold, then you're probably going to have to deal with resistance, right? So
Yes.
the question is, how do I manage resistance, right? So it might be, we train people on lots of different methodologies, but one methodology is what I call, is it possible? Okay. And it's a series of questions that I would ask a group like, okay, folks, if we were, first, I think it's important to understand the vision of what it could look like, but then turn to the people and say, if this is possible, if we could achieve this, how would it benefit Canada? How would it benefit our team? And then finally, by the end, how is it going to benefit you? And then the peers actually talk to one another and convince each other, or don't convince each other, which is important to know as well, okay, of why this is important. And the energy in the room, you'll notice if you do, is it possible? and you start from a very big context, but it ends up at the individual at the end, creates a huge amount of energy amongst the people. I challenge you to use that. Okay, so
On
that's all,
Tuesday.
so that's all process, right? That's all process. So purpose, outcomes, process, and make it a juicy purpose, right? That's what's important. So we have how we show up, how we structure the meeting. The third part now is how we manage the challenging behaviors in the room. So what's a challenging behavior? What's it like? What's that person that drives you crazy when you go to a meeting? Yeah. What are you thinking?
When someone is just straight up on their phone, not listening.
Right. So people are on their phone. So the number one proactive conflict management tool that we train people on is setting guidelines or norms. And that is, it can happen in two ways. For an hour and a half meeting with 10 people, I probably wouldn't be facilitating. I just tell them straight out what the norms are. If I had more time, I would definitely facilitate it and get the folks to come up with themselves. But a typical standard norm is, all technology off during collaborative discussions. Okay? It would be one person speaks at a time. Everyone is expected to participate. Now, setting norms is easy. That's the easy part. What's the tough part? What do you think is the tough part?
Enforcing those norms.
Enforcing them, right? So having to referee. So as a facilitator, my next question would be, I might turn to someone like Michael in the audience here, who's on his phone right now.
He's on his phone.
Yay. Thank you, Michael. Thank you. So I would turn to Mike and I'd say, Mike, if I notice, let's say, someone in the room, and I wouldn't say Mike directly, I would say, if I notice someone in the room breaking one of the norms, let's say like they're actually on their technology, is it okay for me to go, hey, time out. Everyone, I just want to remind you of that norm, technology off. Would you be okay with that if I did that? Excellent. Let me ask you this, Arthur. If I say that and people say totally and they're agreed to it, but I see someone recommitting that, would it be okay if I just turn to you and just say, hey, Arthur, just want to remind you technology off? Would that be okay? Okay, excellent. Well, thank you. So notice you've just empowered me to actually referee you. You've just given me power just through doing that. You have to, the only way you get power is by negotiating power with the group. You have to negotiate, especially if you're dealing with power dynamics, like you have your boss there, or you have senior level people there and you're not senior level. You got to negotiate the power. Now, here's the tough part. After you negotiate it and someone breaks it, you got to referee. Because what happens if you don't? Yeah, you lose your credibility, right? So you have to be prepared to referee. Now, so that's the challenging behavior stuff. So those are the three. Okay, manage challenging behaviors, structure the meeting, and making sure that you show up in a very collaborative, neutral way so that that people see you as a friend.
Right.
Someone really helping them move forward in achieving their outcomes.
It's interesting because, I like this idea of the role of a facilitator. Often cases, meetings happen that are unfacilitated in the sense that people come together for whatever reason that they kind of understand in different ways.
Yep.
And they approach it, how do you explain this? But they all come together in their own way at the same time.
Right.
And because of that, because there's no rule setting, because there's no, kind of establishment of what the commonality really is, it's assumptive. Again, people steal the mic, people distract each other. All these things can break down very quickly. So my question to you is this. How do you determine who should, you mentioned this a couple times, the idea of, assuming for the talk that it's a leader that's facilitating the meeting, right? But otherwise, what could you recommend for a collective in their self-guidance in terms of setting a facilitator? Should one person in every meeting be the facilitator?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, here's the thing. We're a group of 3 people. we're going to lose one person if we ask someone to be a facilitator, right? So the way we can set up is like, hey, Jim, why don't you facilitate or kind of make sure, lead this discussion, but let us talk first, you talk last.
Yeah.
Right? So we don't lose that voice.
Jim?
Because we don't, and we got to be sure that Jim doesn't like come out as the loudest and he sways everyone at the end too as well. So, but I think always having structure in a meeting is important. Like people understand who, what, where, and why, and when.
Yeah.
Now, maybe you don't need a facility. We're all just sitting around the table. We're talking. Someone's taking note. Everyone has a role, right? So someone's taking notes. Someone is kind of leading. Okay, let's move on to our next discussion. We got 5 minutes left. So someone's kind of being quasi-facilitative, but we're all participating. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Once you understand how to facilitate, you don't have to be standing in front of everyone. You can be sitting down at the table and participating.
Well, I find that this is a very interesting thing. And I think a lot of corporate teams don't understand this because they kind of assume that if there is that one Jim or Bob, Mike, Fred, Frank, etc., that is almost excluded from participation by being the kind of guidance for the group,
Right.
that they can't communicate and they can't participate. But the funny thing is, it's a very participatory role.
Huge participatory role. It's just that you're just being careful to not, again, tell you're there to ask. So if you need to say something, throw it out as a suggestion,
Right.
and then end with, what do you think?
Well,
To the group.
the assumption that's really interesting to me is that it's a collective. It's always a collective.
Yes.
Meetings are about the people being there together.
Yeah.
So I think having someone designated as being that kind of flow manager.
Yeah, it's kind of flow manager, people kind of manager, making sure that no one really dominates too much. I think you can have that. And it's really interesting because those people emerge in meetings. You know who that person is. There's always that one person who kind of like is trying to impose some kind of structure. That's the person you want to call on, right? To kind of lead. I think we all have our strengths, and some people are just really good at, managing the flow, kind of making sure it's equitable and everyone has a chance to speak.
Right.
They just emerge a lot of times. If it doesn't, you have to force that kind of condition in a collaborative in order to ensure that happens, because then people will be dominating and talking over one another and trying to, vouch for who's right and who's wrong, and you just go in circles.
Okay, now something we've talked about over the years, I guess, is the experience of adopting digital like technology, like Zoom and these sorts of video conferencing tools to facilitate meetings.
Yeah.
And how that was kind of like this crazy thing with the pandemic. Of course, you're a professional facilitator and you've trained thousands of facilitators and facilitators to be facilitation trainers as well.
Yep.
So I think your perspective on this is definitely going to be the best that I can get. How do these tools, and are there specific ones, video conferencing tools, manage crosstalk to your satisfaction?
I love muting. I would never impose mute on someone unless they were totally doing it and totally unaware, and they're talking to their spouse, and I'd mute them, right? Because and you try to communicate when you chat, you direct message them and everything, and they're still talking. Then I would do it. I think the interesting thing, what's evolved in the area of hybrid meetings, is this notion of what we call a person advocate, an in-person advocate or a remote advocate. Let me give you an example. How many of you are in meetings, hybrid meetings today? How many of you actually are in hybrid meetings? Raise your hand. Okay. Do they tend to be more virtually heavy or more in-person heavy? In-person heavy? More in-person heavy? Yeah. And virtually, okay? So here's the way it works. These days, what we've noticed, what really helps is when it's more in-person heavy, we have this remote advocate. So this is a person who has the computer right in front of them, and they're noticing chat and they're noticing when people raise their hand, either via the participant list or physically raising their hand, and they're there to help the facilitator facilitate. They'll say, Mike, sorry, there's someone who needs to speak right now.
Yeah.
So I have that person in a remote. When I'm remote and I'm facilitating in-person audiences, I have someone remote helping me, who may be either in person or remote, to let me know if either the in-person audience or the remote person or the remote people are actually having something to say. So there's always that role of someone helping me manage those other folks. Why? Because we all suffer from what we call distance or location bias. Have you heard that? You know what that means? The distance or location bias? What it suggests is that we have a natural bias to the people who are around us or in the format that we are, right? So if we're online, we'll naturally be biased to the people we see on the screen. If we're in the room, we'll be naturally biased to the people in the room. It's just built into our DNA. We can't help it. So you have to create the situation where you have other people supporting you. So now I have people with multiple roles. Like on virtual, I'll have a scribe now who's a virtual scribe, who's using Mural or Miro or the polling, or or I'll have a technical person who takes care of all the technical stuff. Although I like taking care of the technical stuff myself. In room, I'll have someone being an in-person remote advocate and just watching the screen and making sure that they let me know what's going on with the people there.
Okay.
I'm watching the screen too myself, and I build it into my guidelines that we go from in-person maybe to the people on the screen, or vice versa. We work back, but that person keeps me true. They help me make sure I do it right.
What is the best? I'm gonna geek out on this for a bit, but what's the best technological kind of setup that you've witnessed? Because often cases, if you're coming into client environment also, to support hybrid environments.
Simple. So I have little tripod stands. So typically when I walk into a room, I'll probably be at a conference table. So I'll have someone using their phone on a tripod stand at the end, and someone on their phone on a tripod stand near me, and they're the cinematographer, the person who has it. When anyone's speaking, they're just moving that phone around for the people in the room, for the people on the screen.
Yeah.
And then I have my computer right in front of me, so I can see what my positioning is when I'm talking, so they can see me. And I actually see all the people on the side. And then there will be one other person, depending on how big the group is, who's on their computer too, and they're my remote advocate.
Okay.
So 2 computers.
So that it sounds like, but the idea, if we talk about what you're trying to convey and how you're trying to express yourself, and for clarity and for is to give remote participants as much perspective on the room and the dynamics of the human environment.
All the nonverbals, so they can get to see those nonverbals that are so important as part of communication. Yep.
And then also giving you that immediacy of seeing all the participants that are in that meeting, whether they're remote or not.
Yeah. I mean, listen, things like the owl. How many of you have heard of the owl, right? It's getting better, but it's just like this stand-up module that can actually literally focus on people when they talk. But it's
terrible.
But it doesn't work that well because the resolution is terrible, right?
Yeah.
So, but it will get better. We'll start seeing.
Well, Microsoft offices are specifically designed to their team's rooms. The people on the screen are life-size to you to help bring the virtual physical.
Love it. But the cost of that for you, like your average small, is much cheaper.
Yeah.
So I get it. But it will get better and better over time. I think within the next 10 years, we're gonna get technology that's gonna be like, you don't know if you're in the room, if people are in the room or out of the room. Like it's just gonna be so good.
Super interesting because we haven't seen much advancement in the last couple decades in video conferencing on this note, because I think it's a really complicated topic, but the webcam. And I don't mean technically the resolution getting better and somehow, cameras lighting people's faces better and, the mics getting a little bit more kind of auto mutey and boomy. It's not necessarily just about that, but this idea of unitary perspective and the fact that there's directionality to the way that people engage with the webcam experience, as opposed to like, look, right now I'm looking around the room, I'm looking at a few different people's faces. You're also seeing my face from different angles in that. There's a lot of information that we're exchanging, right?
Yes.
And there's that dimensionality that helps. We've been playing, of course, at StartWell with multicam a lot in the last 4 years, right?
Right.
Even in this room, there's 3 cameras that are mounted in the ceiling, and they pivot and they zoom and they tilt, and that's all being controlled by one chap there named Poncho. And it's pretty cool to be able to have that tech that can try to kind of relate a lot of information to the people watching.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's crazy when you look at what you need to build out to share the physical environment as best you can with a virtual audience. It gets into cinematography.
Yeah. And it's so important because what we know about research is that, again, different research shows different clues, but the most important thing is non-verbal clues carry the most important messaging in
Right.
terms of understanding where people come from, especially when you hear a mixed message.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I think they like it. I'm not sure, but based on their body language, which is the biggest cue, I'm going to go with this.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that's how come it's so important. And the biggest problem in hybrid and virtual meetings is that people don't want to put their video on. Right.
Oh my God.
Right.
Constantly,
It's huge.
constantly.
It's huge. And so part of my work as a facilitator is to do that buy-in exercise up front with folks and getting them to talk about what happens if we lose nonverbal cues during this meeting. What if we can't see if people aren't really agreeing with this? How are we going to lose out here? And so I get the people to talk about it. And then I say, so what can we do? And minimally, it's that during our important decision making, everyone must have their video on.
Yeah.
So we know if people are on or not on the actual final decision.
It's important. And then there's also this idea of kind of like, I don't know how this became a thing. I think it's about people being embarrassed about where they're working, which is its own kind of weird topic, but virtual backgrounds, right? And the idea that like you're auto green screening yourself all the time. And if you challenge people to see, like, take it off, just it's okay, take it off, show me where you are. There's so much weird stigma, like, no, I can't show you my ironing board.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing, but that's a cultural thing. So I think while we're on the topic of hybrid, I did want to ask you, as a facilitator, also how the practice of dealing with now hybrid teams and even maybe remote teams, people that are not used to being together often.
Right.
How has that changed the process of facilitation for you when the people come together and you are facilitating in-person sessions for them?
I mean, I would always encourage leaders who are building new teams to always have events where they bring people together, at least initially, to build that kind of familiarity and that rapport and that one-on-one contact. And it's like Jordan said, there's nothing like in person versus virtual. You all know that. I'm not having to convince you on that. We all know that. But once you do that, so I do a lot of team alignment events where we align the team, we bring them together, they get to know one another, we know who, what, where, why, and when. Then virtually it works really fine.
Right.
Because everyone, we've built out how are we going to communicate with one another, by what means, by what formats, how often, in what context, So we've talked about all that, so we can actually then have virtual. I think what happens a lot of times is we just throw the team and together and we have some talks on the screen about who we are and why we're doing things, but we don't necessarily align. Now, I still have done alignment activities on screen virtually. It's not as powerful, but it works.
Right.
Okay. And it's very important. So team alignment, how you charter, how you launch your team is critical on expediting the effect of that team as it goes on forward. Yeah.
When we think about culture actually is how we do things around here,
right?
So to speak, which is communication, which is the way we
run our meetings,
we relate.
Yeah.
Right. All those things.
Yeah.
How we define success. But I do think in my work, it is as a consultant and as a coach and advisor with purpose-driven organizations, those that have redefined success and seek to use their business as a force for good. There is a higher purpose. That's what the world needs.
Yeah.
Better business. And what I'm seeing is that those businesses as a foundation have built a really stronger sense of purpose that is shared. And certainly there is the need to build relationships. But I just wanted to throw that in the mix because I do think culture eats strategy for breakfast, in the words of Peter Drucker, and the bigger purpose. I mean, if you're coming into the meeting at the 11th hour with that group, as you shared, Michael, that really
Should have done it
yeah,
way earlier on.
it's right. That's the reactive, trying to put fires out.
Right.
Really, how do we build a stronger foundation? How do we build better relationships? How do we build a shared sense of vision and purpose?
Yep.
And then really are truly aligned in a deeper, grounded and higher pursuit way. Would love thoughts and perspectives on what you see in that regard.
Well, I think that's so important. I mean, culture is built upon the people who contribute to that, but also effective leadership vision. Like when I go in to build culture, to build a participatory culture within organizations, I always start with the leader first. Because if the leader is not a participatory leader, it's like, it's like oil and water mixing together, right? It just won't mix. So I have fired clients, like literally walked out because there's I'm not here to convince you to become a more facilitative leader. You either believe in it and it's something you want to support and you want to create a participatory culture, or you don't. If you want to be autocratic, that's up to you, but I'm not going to change that. So
And that's there's also a flip.
Yeah.
I had a meeting about this earlier today.
Yeah.
Where it's not about the autocrat, it's about the pacifist.
It's about the pacifist. Well, okay, so I can deal with pacifists way better than I can do with autocrats.
Yeah.
Because at least a pacifist, you can wake up. You can maybe help them to understand that there are possibilities here. But with the autocrat, it's that righteousness that you can't fight against.
Right.
There's no room. Okay, unless they have some kind of earth-shattering thing that, they die and they wake up new, or something like that. But that rarely happens. So for me, it's about working with the leader and helping the leader be very clear and concise about what their vision is, what they're doing, and that this notion of building a participatory culture is important, that everyone buys in and that everyone's on board and that everyone's helping to move forward. And then that leads into great facilitative processes. You can start bringing people together and start talking about, okay, let's start with an empty slate here. What do we want? And you can get, in light of this vision that the leader just gave, what do we need to do to get there? And that's a powerful process when people feel that they can participate in the shaping of their company. Those are the kinds of things I love doing. That's what feeds me. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what we need a lot more of, fundamentally. And it's something I'm excited that I'm privy to here at StartWell. Is like the bulk of the meetings that we have happening here, no matter how efficiently they're run,
Right.
We see people enjoying being together.
Right.
And the outcome of that is that they feel relieved. Like, this is the number one thing, I guess. First, it's like we notice they're happier when they leave than from when they came, which is a phenomenal thing. Because if you go to their office, that's not the case.
Right.
When people are like in BMO Tower, it's a little too cold for them. Yeah.
It's so nice to get off, to go into another place, especially here. I love this place, StartWell, because it's a place to get out of your normal encasement. It's
Right.
going somewhere different. I think it's very important for building innovation, getting people to think out of the box, to take them literally out of the box.
Out of the box.
And
yeah.
bring them somewhere. So I absolutely agree.
Yeah. And so people are happier when they leave. That also means that they can, if I think the ego is removed from the table,
Yeah.
they're getting consensus and honesty and then feeling like the camaraderie enables their ownership together of their destiny is kind of core to that cultural piece.
I mean, we hope. We
Yeah.
hope. It all depends upon some of the folks. Some folks, they want to be very righteous and they want to be very positional. And I think, again, It's all around helping them to understand what happens if we all remain positional? What happens if we all remain self-righteous? Is it going to hinder us from being able to achieve this? And then biting your lip and being quiet and let people talk and see what they have to say, right? The art of quiet in facilitation is very important, right? It's not easy to do.
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I love all the advice that you have given around leadership. But as Christine mentioned, we're working currently on a program to combat youth unemployment. So essentially, what we're doing is we're creating a 2-year program that involves a 1-year job that we work with employers to find. And before they go onto the job, they have this 1 month of onboarding where we provide them with all the skills that they need,
Right on.
that they, don't learn in school. And this is for barriered youth, so youth that have faced various barriers. So for somebody in an entry level role, what do you think they can do to, communicate well, and where they might not have a typical facilitative role in a meeting? How do you think they could perform well?
Well, I mean, if they have a facilitative role, they can do all the things that I talked about.
Or if they don't?
And if they don't, they're going to, all I can say is that the possibility for success is greatened when we use these types of techniques. But it is possible to have a shitty meeting and people going like, okay, well, that was okay. Well, well, we got some things to discuss. In certain cultures, the expectation of having an effective, they don't even know what that means because they've never had an effective meeting. So you can't, it's hard to say, well, if you could do this, you could improve your meeting. They may say, well, our meetings are crappy. It's just the way it is. Who cares? People don't understand. Like Jordan said, the impact and loss of money and time and effort that people put into meetings could be placed somewhere else rather than meetings. Yet people still have crappy meetings. So first, it's understanding that there's possibilities for something better and what drives an effective meeting. That's the first thing I'd like to learn as a new person. Like how do you know if a meeting is good? What makes a good meeting, right? Next, how do I show up? Like leaps, that's important. And third is, how do I structure the meeting so I can maximize the engagement of everyone? Now, if there is a leader in the room, this is maybe what I think you might be getting at, and it might be wrong, but I always talk to people about, some people say, well, I never facilitate a meeting. Why do I need to learn these skills, right? And I say to them, well, is it possible you might be in a crappy meeting? Oh, yeah, for sure. Is it possible that you may be there and not understand why you're there? And they say, yeah. Well, here's some of the things you can do. You can facilitate from the chair. That's what I call it, facilitating from the chair. And what you can do is you can say, sorry for being a pest, but why are we meeting right now? Like, what are we trying to achieve? I'm just wondering, are we all supposed to participate in this meeting? It takes a little courage, but every participant has a right to ask questions to make a meeting more effective. In fact, it is their duty. But again, they got to know what makes an effective meeting. So that's what you first got to do. And I'd be happy to help you figure out what some of those fundamentals are.
Amazing, thank you.
No
Yeah,
problem.
and part of it also is like, I mean, like, I look at this as like managing ignorance sometimes is also about directing the right kind of engagement in the moment. So if someone comes into a meeting ignorant perhaps of no value judgment, but of the topic matter because they're not from that organization, or they're youth and they haven't had a job before and they're being placed into an organization where they have to participate in meetings that they're subject to, rather than trying to use the time of the participants to catch up on what they're talking about, they can focus on being in the moment to make sure that the meeting's successful. And then also learning from the dialogue of the participants that they are with to take questions after the meeting to the right person.
Yeah. I think people need to be empowered and know that they can ask questions around when they're in a meeting that's not working. They have the right. It's kind of like rights of partnership. If I come to a meeting, I have a right to say, why are we here? And that's okay. It's not a CLM. You know what a CLM is? Career limiting move. Okay? You can ask those questions, and you should be able to ask those questions because hopefully the organization wants there to be effective and better meetings and people to utilize their time well, right? Yeah. Any other questions? Excellent.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, there is one at the
Oh,
back.
yes.
I had a question specifically around virtual meetings. How, I guess, in an in-person meeting, you are confronting the verbal aspect as well as the non-verbal aspect. In case of a virtual meeting, sometimes what I run into is you mentioned like there is a non-verbal that gets completely shut off, but then you also end up in a virtual space which adds a new dimension. So you are getting verbal cues, which is synchronous, and you have chats on the side, which is happening asynchronous, and each platform will have its own features like reactions, and that adds a new dynamics. So like, how do you, given that there's different mediums happening at the same time, what have you found effective to get everyone on the same board? Like, either this could be tools or just structuring the meeting so that everyone's on the same page or on the same board.
Well, thank you. So how do we get everyone on the same page in a meeting, especially when there's so many different types of tools and everything like that? I think, again, once people feel that their voice matters in discussions, meaning, so for example, I have what's in front of me, what I call a participation map when I'm running a virtual meeting. I have everyone's name, and then I have an actual column where I put a check mark every time someone participates. So when I begin the meeting for the first 15, 20 minutes, I tell everyone, one of our norms is everyone's expected to participate. By the way, I have a participation map here. I have all your names, and I know we're talking about equity. I know we're talking about inclusion. I know how important that is. So within the next 20 minutes, we're going to engage in some discussion. And if I don't hear from you, I'm going to actually come to you and ask you directly. And so here's my first question, and I'll throw it out, right? So, that person might have talked, and Mohammed talked. Okay, I got that. By 15 minutes, I'm noticing there are 3 people I haven't talked. And I'll say, okay, so time out. I haven't heard from 3 folks. So I'm going to ask you, Amit, what do you think about this? No problem. So I'm using tools in order to engage them. Also, I use the more simple, the better. Here's another thing. When people are talking, I'll have a Microsoft Word doc or a Google Doc open, and I'm typing in or have someone scribing everything that they're saying, as I would in in-person facilitation. Why? Because when people see that their voice is being captured, they're more likely to want to participate, right? So I'm using these tools constantly to get people on, to get people part of the discussion and engage. I'm always thinking, how can I engage these people?
And it seems like some of those actions that are built into the tools that are video conferencing tools for engagement, they're just like kind of gimmicky, right? So some people will take these passive actions to not engage for real. So the idea is perhaps to engage them more
Totally.
proactive.
I'm building in polls. I have breakouts going on in my discussions. I'm having someone be the person to ask other people who can talk. So I'm giving roles constantly to people to engage them, to make sure everyone's involved. No one leaves my meetings virtually feeling bored, okay? Because everyone feels like they've had a part in it. And that's what you were doing, is we're making sure people have roles in these particular meetings. Yeah.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, thanks for your time. Let's break, and we can, of course, have a drink and chat and continue the conversation.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you, folks.